Ian, you've been talking about your US index. Is there a global index that you're working on?
We are now in the process of launching international and global strategies. And so we've done some modeling of how this should work with a global strategy as well. So I sent over a graph that's 10-year tested data, basically just showing that our Etho analysis in terms of showing climate efficiency and overall sustainability leads to better performance seems to be holding true both with global companies and with the US companies, as we already have with the Climate Leadership Index here in the US. We've always had a fully global data set that we've been working on, but for a while have been wanting to launch our own fully global strategy, as well as an international strategy that wouldn't include US companies. So global strategy has US companies and the rest of the world developed markets. International wouldn't have US companies in it, so you can mix and match that with what we have with Etho already. Long story short, we've seen that the climate efficiency investing and overall ESG integration, when you do it in this deeper dive way, seems to work for global just as well as it works for US. And in some cases, it looks like it's working even better. We actually did already help launch a global fund in Australia, but that's not available for investors here in the US. So here in the US, we're planning to launch a global strategy that probably first would be available to investors is what are called separately managed accounts. And we have a partner to do that. And then eventually we'd like to find the seed capital to turn that into an exchange traded fund like we have with Etho here already.
Let us know when that happens.
Hopefully soon. Though in our crazy world right now with COVID and everything else, it's always hard to tell.
It seems to me there's sort of an implied criticism of people giving investment advice here that, you would think if you put a constraint on the universe of companies to invest in, that would tend to make things worse, except that they're clearly doing something wrong.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes back to what's called modern portfolio theory, which many of your viewers may have heard about, and it's no longer at all modern. It's from the 50s originally. And basically modern portfolio theory says you should invest in everything, diversify everywhere, because that gives you the best mix performance regardless of what's going on in the world. What modern portfolio theory misses, though, is there are these fundamental technology and policy shifts that make investing in everything not actually look like a good idea. For example, it wouldn't make sense to diversify into investing in Blockbuster and other brick and mortar video stores with the transformation to streaming that's happened in the video world, or invest in landlines with the transformation to mobile phones that's happened over the past few decades.
Or maybe the fossil fuel industry isn't the bargain these days.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was going, because I far too many times hear generally conservative institutional investors, sometimes hedge fund type folks saying, well, don't you think there are great bargains out there in oil and gas and even coal, because of course they look really cheap relative to where they've been historically. But what that thinking is missing, of course, as probably everybody who watches your show already knows, is the fact that fossil fuels are a dying industry, not just because climate change and related policies are putting all these pressures to try to push fossil fuels out of the market, with, of course, the fossil fuel industry kicking and screaming and trying to pay off and twist the arms of politicians to stay relevant and keep selling fossil fuels as long as they can. But the bigger story is not climate policies and things like the Paris Agreement. The biggest story is the fact that renewable energy is just the best, cheapest form of electricity in most parts of the world already.
And getting cheaper all the time.
Cheaper and cheaper solar and wind every day, along with cheaper and cheaper batteries and other types of energy storage. It's just a no-brainer. That's where electricity is going, as I'm sure you've talked about many times, not just on your show, but with everything else you do. Beyond that, you look at what's going on with transportation electrification now as well, and that combination of really cheap and continuously getting cheap for renewable energy with already pretty cheap and getting exponentially cheaper battery technology just makes it look like electric vehicles powered by 100% renewable energy will just be the best, cheapest driving option with zero subsidies for basically everybody buying a new car sometime within the next few years. Bloomberg analysts are predicting now within the next 3 years that'll be the case. Of course, if there are policy supports in places like Norway, it's already the case where an EV powered by renewable energy is just the best, cheapest option. So once you hit that economic tipping point, and oh, by the way, electric vehicles, if you haven't been in one yet, generally are just a lot more fun to drive. They accelerate faster. They do a lot of other things better. They require less maintenance. I have an EV. I love it. And
I'm embarrassed to say that Jeannie and I have 3.
Well, I have seen your little smart one. I love it. It's awesome. We have a Chevy Bolt, which so far hasn't caught on fire yet. And
Nice.
hopefully that will still be the case. The bottom line is it makes no sense to diversify into dying industries. And the fossil fuel industry is clearly a dying industry. And anybody who invests in conventional index funds through Fidelity or Vanguard, wherever else you may have your 401k and personal investments, those conventional index funds by definition are filled with all these players in dying industries, and as well as leaders in pollution in other industries beyond fossil fuels.
Do you have the traditional car companies in the index? I mean, they're trying, sort of, some of them.
Generally, no. We do have Tesla in there, and Tesla, as you would probably guess, is far and away the leader in terms of climate efficiency in the auto industry. We have had some other companies, I will not name, that have been close to making our climate efficiency thresholds to make it into the index, but none of them have been making enough of that transition yet. Volkswagen, who I already called out, is a laggard. They were great at marketing, but the reality was the exact opposite of that. They were actually, in our climate efficiency calculations going back now more than a decade, they've consistently been one of the laggards, one of the least climate efficient, one of the companies that had the most pollution for every dollar invested in the auto industry. With that said, Volkswagen now, because of all this pressure post the emissions gate scandal, or whatever you want to call it, Volkswagen now has, of course, made this big commitment to transitioning to electrification very rapidly. So we'll see how well they actually achieve that. We're, again, much more interested in what companies are actually doing versus what they say they're doing. If you believe the oil industry leaders in Europe, for example, like Total and Shell and BP, they have a long track record of saying they're going to make this transition away from fossil fuels to becoming diversified companies with a lot of renewables. But of course, then we see lots of people leaving who joined those companies thinking that they were going to actually make that transition, and they realized it was just a bunch of PR and marketing. And I know many friends who have actually gone through that experience personally, thinking they could, from the inside, change a fossil fuel company to not want to sell fossil fuels, and realize that, so far at least, all the messaging around making that transition is just a bunch of marketing hype as opposed to real corporate strategy.
And in any case, too slow.
Yeah, it's certainly not anywhere within the time frame that we need to solve climate change, which is really decarbonize everything yesterday and then start with net greenhouse gas emissions removal. It's certainly not in a time frame that would work at all to achieve the goals that we've put out there with the Paris Agreement and other things. We're basically showing that decarbonizing the entire economy is already happening. There are already climate efficiency leaders everywhere, and it also seems to be a good guide for investment and capital flows. And so again, it's really not about either or, investing in solving climate change or investing in making money. It's about investing in both at the same time and showing that we're certainly not at all there yet, but if we at least start the flows of capital towards climate leaders in every segment of the economy, not just utilities, but everywhere, that just seems to be a better way to invest.
Yeah, well, Jeannie and I are in, literally, in the fund. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks again, Bruce.
Thanks for watching. This is Energy Nerd Show and Tell.
It's the show that we want to watch, so we're thinking maybe some of you energy nerds want to watch it too. If you do, then hey, tell your friends and subscribe right around here. Click there,
And check
or there, or over here.
Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and where
Yeah,
else.
and the Energy Nerd website at energynerdshow.com. you can always go there. And if you want to be a guest, you can volunteer to be a guest. We love to have guests. In fact, that's kind of what the show is all about.
Absolutely.